So how do you like the current negotiation progress? Do you have any expectations about the talk before last week's summit?
Look, it's very difficult to comment on specific meetings that are happening. It's very difficult to know what's going on behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me, a credible progress would be a progress in which the issue of Northern Ireland is resolved.
Mm-hmm.
This would be the sole criteria of what would be a credible progress, because unless Northern Ireland, the issue of Northern Ireland is resolved, then it's very difficult to see what type of trade agreement we will have. I think the two are very closely interlinked. So this is really what I would like to see. In the meantime, of course, you do have other events that are coming in the way where the European Union and the UK have shown incredible solidarity, and I'm talking about the Russian issue.
Mm-hmm.
So that is actually a good demonstration that it can work.
Yeah.
But with specifics to the Brexit, I think till we see something that we can really evaluate as workable,
yes,
on Ireland, I will find it difficult to evaluate progress.
Yes. So as you have mentioned about the Northern Ireland issue, and how do you like the backstop plan, which could keep Northern Ireland in a customs union? Do you believe Britain will come up with a more imaginative and operable solution, maybe Plan A, to avoid a hard border in the Irish Sea?
Well, I mean, I think that's the issue here. Is you can't have it both ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how can you have customs union with the Northern Ireland, not with the rest of the UK?
Mm-hmm.
Because that would imply that there is a border in between the sea, so between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, namely
yes,
Great Britain. That would imply there would be a hard border on the sea.
Yes.
Can you imagine that being workable? It's very difficult to see how this can work. Unless something is done in the direction of a virtual border, which is basically digital,
mm-hmm,
so everything is being done digitally. But even that, I'm not entirely sure how workable it is. But okay, let's see these imaginative solutions, and we can evaluate them when we see them.
Do you have any suggestions for Prime Minister Theresa May about the Plan A?
I wouldn't even start Brexit if it left to me, but I think
mm-hmm,
it's not a good idea.
Yeah.
But I think the hard question is, what are you prepared to give up on?
Mm-hmm.
See?
Yeah.
Why? Because that's the issue there. I mean, something's got to give. You cannot have it all.
Yes.
Right? I mean, if you want access to the single market, then that means that and you prevent a hard border in Northern Ireland, then that's of course very good. But that means you don't have control, which
mm-hmm,
was the point of Brexit, right? You don't gain back control. Something has to give here, and it's not obvious to me what the real red lines are. I mean, we hear a lot about red lines, but what the real ones are, it's not obvious. And that's what makes the whole issue very difficult, simply because it's not. If you were to sit down and design it, you wouldn't know how to design it and
mm-hmm,
keep true to the outcome of the referendum.
Yeah.
So this is where I think this is why I have no idea what the outcome will be.
Mm-hmm. And in your article, one of your article, you said Britain is looking for a CETA plus or an EEA minus agreement, but the EU would offer less than Britain expects. Do you still hold the same idea now?
Well, I mean, I had argued that these two scenarios, so the CETA plus or the EE minus, are starting points.
Mm-hmm.
They are not end points. There will be starting points for negotiations, and it depends because there's always a distance to be covered from the starting point. And the question is, where do you want to start from? Do you want to start with sort of an agreement like Canada and then add things on in order to satisfy financial services?
Mm-hmm.
But then there is just one point to negotiate, and that is exactly this, financial services. Or do you want to start with an EEA type of agreement and then remove actually what we thought the British would be asking, which is basically the free movement of labor?
Yes.
Right. You see, but depending on which one you believe, the distances are different, right?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I think that the UK would prefer to go in the direction of the CETA, start from a CETA agreement and then add to it something for financial services. But it's still not clear to me
mm-hmm,
what what exactly they want. I think the UK will capitulate at some point, and probably try and arrange something along the lines that the EU asks. But again, that is going to be a difficult thing to sell at home, so it might create domestically some political instability. So, yeah, I mean, very difficult to see what the end game will look like.
Have you ever find any changes of the positions? I mean, if the CETA Plus was a starting point, well, it is possible, I mean, to end with what Britain really want at last. Britain will got this kind of CETA Plus at last.
Well, I think the EU wouldn't like that. The EU would prefer something much closer to what we have right now. And the other thing, of course, that the EU has been advocating is that if you want access to the single market, then you are going to unnecessarily accept the four freedoms. But the UK on the other side says, I want the single market, I want something for my financial services, but I don't want to accept the four freedoms. I want to restrict the movement of labour. And this is why the whole thing is so difficult to resolve. Who will win? I really sincerely don't know. It's not that I don't believe that the EU is more powerful. The EU is bigger and more powerful, but the EU doesn't lose out by a bad deal. So what they managed to do is something that I think will be determined only by the threat of a very hard Brexit close at the time, which is typically how the EU works. Always on the last minute, it patches up a deal. I hope it's a good economic deal, but I think that at some point the UK is going to have to sort of put a lot of what we call a lot of water in their wine and accept that for economic gains they need to abide by the EU legislation.
What is the best the most possible future relationships for the two sides in your idea?
What the best outcome would be, in my view, is what I would like to see, which is something like Norway, the EEA, but allowing for the fact that the UK won a referendum on limiting the movement of labour. I think that would be the best outcome, because economically it's a good outcome for both. And it allows the UK to declare victory at home by saying, you see, we have restricted the movement of labour, which is the whole point of this referendum. I think that would be the best outcome.
So the most possible one? How about the most possible one?
Yeah, that's, I would like to think that the best outcome is also the most possible outcome, but that implies that the EU is ready to accept that the four freedoms are not, that they're not unbreakable. So, and that's difficult. I understand that it is difficult, but in my view, the EU needs to accept that.
So,
because you have a sovereign. That's what I think the EU should do. It needs to accept that, because you have in a country that is leaving out of the EU, they have the right to determine this. At the same time, they do not destroy the economic relationships that we have established after 50 years of cooperation. That would be silly in my view. So I think that would be the best outcome, ought to be also the most probable outcome.
Great.
Given the uncertainties.
So do you think when Michel Barnier every time he say no cherry picking, did he really mean it, or just sort of pretend, or just a bargain chip?
No, I mean, yes. I mean, look, this is a negotiation. So a negotiation will always have tactics. And, I think at the end of the day, we need to sort of try and understand the merits of suggestions that are being forward and the feasibility of suggestions. Of course, the EU doesn't want cherry picking, but the EU also doesn't want the UK leaving, right? I mean, that's I mean, left to EU, the UK should have never left. But okay, here we are now, and the question is, how can we make it work and ensure that we have good outcomes at the end? I don't think you should see tactics for tactics, and also you should evaluate outcomes for their own merit. At the end of the day, it's not Mr. Barnier that determines what the outcome is; it is the countries, and if the countries decide that this is what we are prepared to give in order to maintain good economic relationships, it will happen. And I think we haven't seen the urgency yet. Like the typically European problems, it's always at the very last minute that we come to an agreement. Till then, it will be a lot of posturing. So
Yes.
tactics on one side and the other.
Yeah. So, are there any other difficulties lies ahead for the two sides besides the Irish border issue and the differences about the type of the agreement?
Well, I mean, I think political stability in the UK is an important issue, and of course, political stability will be determined also by the quality of the negotiations and the quality of the outcome of the negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should not underestimate quite what difficulty the UK finds itself right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is an issue that might actually be of a bigger problem in, let's say, in the next year or so. For the moment, this political uncertainty seems to have reduced. But if we come towards the end of March, towards the end of the next year, which is as we're coming towards the end of the deadline for exiting, if the deal that is being negotiated isn't very good, it's not unthinkable that there will be a pressure on the government and possibly a call for elections. Mm-hmm. That is a non-zero probability event.
Yeah. I have read a book called How to Stop Brexit. Maybe you have heard of it. And do you think it is possible on the British side will just overrun the referendum and do it again?
To stop Brexit, you also need the consent of all the other 27 EU countries. Mm-hmm. And, that is a process that one must not underestimate. It's no longer possible just for the UK to stop Brexit. Mm-hmm. Because it triggered Article 50. It requires everybody else to give a consent.
Yeah. Right.
Now, if that is the case, all other countries are going to sort of engage with Britain to understand what is going on, and it's not unthinkable that the other countries is saying, okay, if you want to stay in the EU, you have to get rid of your rebate. You have to renege on your rebate. Would Britain not only stay in the EU but also give up its rebate? It's difficult to. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult in my view. Moreover, I think that the dynamics are such that it's kind of difficult to imagine Britain, let's say, in April 2019, having decided it's stopping the whole thing, to come back and sit around the table like nothing has happened. I think that's not quite so easy. I mean, let's suppose Mrs. May is there still, and Mrs. May then comes to the next European Council meeting and says, sorry, I mean, the whole past 2 years have all been a nightmare and everything is forgotten. I just don't know that their position is not compromised if something like this were to happen. The best scenario, in my view, and I talk as somebody who would really have preferred for this thing to have happened, mm-hmm. I think that the best outcome for this is to sort of ensure that we have a good Brexit, meaning an economically good Brexit that also doesn't poison our political relationships and doesn't poison our alliance. And then as soon as we have the next generation of politicians, then we negotiate an entry into the EU, if that is, of course, what the UK wants. But to stop something like this, where we are right now,
yes,
I'm not entirely sure if this is constructive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as a foreigner, not born in Europe, it is very hard for me to understand the dilemma here, and also which side do you think will receive more damages from the Brexit, Britain or just the EU 27?
But I mean, I just look at the numbers, right? I mean, Britain relies a lot mm-hmm. in exporting to the other 27. For the other 27, the UK is just one country.
Yes.
Right? I mean, so basically, if we have a bad deal with the UK, then the UK loses exports for 27 countries. This is enormous. And very close trading partners, right? Yeah. The amount of trade is about €500 billion, $500 billion with the EU. If this is compromised, that will be a very big loss for the UK. It is a smaller partner, so that's why I think they are the ones to lose the most. And not to mention that it loses a political alliance, so mm-hmm. its ability to craft trade deals with the rest of the world. As UK, it will be will be compromised. The EU is a big trading partner in the world, and it has got power to extract rents. The UK alone will not be quite so easy for the UK to sort of go to the rest of the world and craft deals for itself, quite in the same manner as it did as part of the EU. So I think the UK will be the one to lose the most.
But one day, after the Brexit, Britain is possible to go back to the old days like glorious isolation. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's. I mean, there is an element of truth in that. I mean, I don't know how true it is, but I think the UK, inside the EU, could do a lot better for itself than outside the EU.
Yeah. Besides, the Brexit will also leave a large hole for the budget, the EU budget.
Well, it is a hole. It's not a large one, but it is a hole, and there are ways of trying at least cover some of it. But yes, I mean, you have to understand the European budget is just 1% of EU GDP, so it's not a very big thing. And of that 1%, it's just 15% that the UK was paying in. So yes, there is a hole, but it's not. I mean, it's not enormous. I mean, depends on what you compare it to. But you're talking about 1% of European GDP, and then it's 15% of that. So it's really not that. I mean, it's not a big hole. It's a hole.
Yeah, but the hole will expand the divergences, the divisions between the old Europe to the new Europe. I mean, the east and the western part of Europe Union. How do you like this idea?
I don't know that it is the budget or the hole in the budget that will exacerbate differences. I think there are differences and there are important conversations between the groupings you've described, but I don't think this necessarily is going to be made worse as a result of the hole in the European budget. I don't think that's right. I mean, there are other serious conversations that we need to have in the grouping you've described, and indeed in the context of EU reform and Euro area reform, but they are not precipitated by Brexit. There are other things that are more important in this respect.
Okay, thank you, Professor. I got the last question. It's maybe a more generous and more general and a more global one. You know, the globalization and regional integration has long been considered to be a trend, global trend, but the Brexit has been a surprise, a big surprise. Do you think there will be negative ideas released by Brexit to the globalization and regional integration?
Well, I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, and also for the EU in itself, it's the first time that we go in the opposite direction, right? I mean, over the past 50 years, there was one direction that we were going in, and that was the direction of more integration. Now we are somehow reversing this with Brexit. But in terms of the global scene, I think the problem of openness and globalization is more threatened by a more protective US than it is threatened by Brexit. Because even though you're right in saying that it's kind of reversing integration, I don't think it's the UK that is wanting to threaten the global multilateralism. I think the UK, even in the current juncture, is arguing for openness in trade, and in fact, in anything, Brexit was about ability to do more trade deals. So I don't think it is Brexit that might threaten this. I think a more serious threat to this is a US stance that is much more protectionist. I think that would be the only threat, the only risk I see to global openness and globalization.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. That is very, very helpful.
My pleasure.
And I hope.
I love it.
Yeah, and I hope one day we're gonna have another chance for a more exchange on other topics.
Sure, with pleasure.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.